You know, we often think about the immediate dangers soldiers face, the obvious battlefield risks.
Mm-hmm. The things you can see.
Exactly. But what if there's something else? A silent, long-term threat, maybe hidden in their gear or even their training grounds.
That's a really critical question.
We need to unpack this today because well, frankly, alarming news has just broken in Israel. We're talking front-page headlines, INET, Haaretz, Mariv.
Yes, it's getting a lot of attention.
And the core statistic is startling. Israeli combat veterans, they're 2.5 times more likely to develop ALS compared to civilians.
2.5 times. That's significant.
And it gets worse. For paratroopers, the risk jumps. Well, it's around 9 times higher.
9 times. Wow. That specificity, that magnitude, it really makes you stop and think. It's not just a slight increase.
No, not at all. And the fact it's major news there just highlights how seriously they're taking this.
Understandably so. ALS is devastating.
Absolutely. And this isn't just about raising alarms. Today, we're diving deep into a new document. You could almost call it a rapid response medical investigation. It's titled Mur'al Without Poison IDF versus ALS.
Mur'al Without Poison. That's an interesting title. Mur'al meaning like fierce motivation or fighting spirit.
Exactly. Keep the spirit, lose the poison. And what's fascinating is the collaboration behind it. It's writer News Strilovitz working with, get this, OpenAI's language model, ChatGPT-o3.
A human writer and an AI model. That's quite novel for this kind of investigation.
Isn't it? It suggests they needed to process a huge amount of complex data, fast, from all sorts of different fields.
Right, pulling together military tech specs, toxicology, maybe even field reports. AI could definitely help synthesize that.
So our mission today for you listening is to cut through that complexity. We want to pull out the most compelling evidence, the proposed solutions from this open source manual.
Kind of like piecing together a puzzle. Using all these different sources, tech manuals, scientific papers, battlefield anecdotes even.
Precisely. And this Mur'al Without Poison manual, it doesn't shy away from naming potential suspects. It puts forward 2 main hypotheses they think need urgent attention.
Okay, what are they?
First, titanium silica nanoaerosols. Think high energy impacts modern titanium alloys hitting sand.
Nanoaerosols, okay.
Second, formaldehyde bursts, released from modern explosives and propellants during combustion.
Formaldehyde. Both sound like plausible environmental or occupational exposures in a military context. They link directly to modern gear and activities.
Right. It shifts focus from just stress to specific material interactions, specific chemicals.
That makes sense.
But here's the key thing. This manual isn't just pointing fingers, it's proactive. It's solution-focused.
So it's not just identifying problems.
Not at all. It offers testable hypotheses, suggests real mitigation strategies, things they could do relatively quickly, and lays out a whole research roadmap for the longer term.
That's crucial. Understanding the why, but also focusing on the what can we do now and
Right.
what do we need to find out next.
Exactly. It's about protecting soldiers' health, practically.
A very commendable approach moving forward based on the evidence available.
So let's start by really getting a handle on the problem itself. ALS in this military context. Now, ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, it's just devastating.
It truly is. Progressive degeneration of motor neurons, the nerve cells controlling muscles.
And down at the molecular level, what's actually going on? We see proteins like TDP43, SOD1 starting to misfold, clump together.
Right, protein aggregation.
Yeah.
And then there's mitochondrial dysfunction. The cell's powerhouse is breaking down. They become fragmented.
Plus inflammation, right? The glial cells that should be supporting neurons actually turn against them.
Exactly. All these things, misfolded proteins, energy failure, inflammation, oxidative stress, create this toxic environment for the motor neurons.
Which ultimately leads to them dying off.
And that's what we see clinically. Muscle weakness, spasticity, eventually respiratory failure. Usually within, 3 to 5 years?
Tragically short. Now, this Israeli situation, it's concerning, but it's not entirely unique, is it?
No, and that's important. We've seen similar patterns emerging elsewhere. Studies in the US, the UK, Denmark, they've all shown veterans seem to be overrepresented among ALS patients.
Even after accounting for typical risk factors?
Right, like age, sex, smoking. This international consistency is a strong signal. Something about military service or specific aspects of it seems to be involved.
And the Israeli data really sharpens that picture. The 2025 Honig study they reference. quite stark.
What did it find specifically?
Well, 46% of the ALS veterans had combat roles versus about 23% in the controls. That gives an odds ratio of 2.5.
So 2.5 times more likely if you were in a combat role.
But it gets more specific. Paratrooper qualification, odds ratio around 9.
9 times. That's a huge jump.
And female combatants, though the numbers are small so need caution, showed an odds ratio over 20.
Over 20. That's
Yeah.
extraordinary. It really screams that specific roles, specific exposures within those roles are key.
And the manual makes a really crucial point about Israel's draft system.
Compulsory service. How does that factor in?
It minimizes what's called self-selection bias. You don't just have people volunteering who might already be different in some way. You get a broader cross-section.
Right. Which suggests the increased risk is more likely due to exposures during service, not pre-existing factors.
Exactly. It strengthens the link to service-related exposures.
That makes sense. It helps rule out some alternative explanations.
So why don't the usual explanations for ALS fit this picture? Well, genetics. Less than 15% of Israeli cases.
Okay, so not primarily genetic.
Age. Doesn't quite fit either. These veterans are often diagnosed about a decade earlier than typical civilian cases.
Earlier onset. Interesting.
And stress. Military life is stressful, no doubt. But general stress wouldn't explain why the risk is concentrated in high-impact roles, infantry, engineers, paratroopers, and not, say, equally stressful intelligence jobs.
Good point. It points towards something more specific than just stress. Specific physical or environmental exposures tied to those roles.
Which brings us to what the manual calls the new exposure paradigm. They're looking at modern military stuff, mostly introduced since around 2004.
Okay, like what?
Lightweight titanium alloys used in suppressors, rifle bolts, barrel liners now.
Titanium.
Also, certain smoke formulations based on titanium dioxide or tetrachloride used for screening.
Right, obscurance.
And importantly, modern high-brisance explosives. Think RDX, C4, PTN sheets for breaching.
Plastic explosives, and they release.
Formaldehyde, when they detonate or combust.
So titanium and formaldehyde are the prime suspects in this new paradigm, linked to post-2004 equipment and materials.
That's the idea. It's a logical place to look for new risk factors.
It seems so.
So the key takeaway here is ALS risk seems tied to specific roles and their exposures. Old explanations fall short. Titanium, silica, and formaldehyde fit the data better. And action, both research and prevention, is needed urgently.
A very clear and compelling assessment to start with. It sets the stage well for exploring those hypotheses.
All right, let's dig into the first one, that titanium-silica synergy. Now, titanium metal itself, like in implants, is usually pretty inert, right?
Generally, yes. Its oxide layer makes it very stable in the body, and silica dust, while an irritant, doesn't easily get into the brain on its own.
So what's the danger? How do they become harmful together?
Well, the hypothesis focuses on high-energy interactions, impacts friction, extreme heat, common in military settings.
Yeah.
During these events, you can create microscopic titanium shards. And if this happens in sandy environments, like much of Israel, these fresh titanium surfaces can embed in silica grains.
Creating a new kind of interface.
Exactly, a fresh Tiosci interface. And the research suggests this specific interface acts like a catalyst.
A catalyst for what?
For something called Fenton-like chemistry. Essentially, it generates highly reactive oxygen species, superoxide, hydroxyl radicals, nasty stuff at a cellular level.
Like localized microscopic rusting causing cell damage.
That's a decent analogy. It drives oxidative stress. And interestingly, separate nanotoxicology research shows TO-Euro nanoparticles can cross the blood-brain barrier and cause inflammation.
And silica helps them get there.
There's evidence silica particles might enhance the uptake of titanium nanoparticles into the brain, maybe acting like a Trojan horse.
Okay, so how are soldiers actually getting exposed to this TC combo in these high-energy ways?
The manual points to several routes. First, rifle fire with titanium alloy suppressors.
The heat from firing?
Yes, over 800 degrees Celsius. It can erode the suppressor baffles, releasing tiny titanium particles. These mix with the muzzle blast dust, which often contains silica from the range environment.
And infantry, special forces, snipers, they do a lot of shooting.
A lot. So frequent, potentially high-dose exposure there.
What else?
Parachute landings, especially in sandy areas like the Negev.
How does that work?
The M2 parachute uses titanium hardware in the links. The impact force on landing kicks up a sand cloud. Abrasion could release titanium particles that mix with the silica dust.
And paratroopers jump regularly.
Quarterly, for some units like paratroopers or Sayret Maglin. So, less frequent than firing, but potentially a high-dose inhalation event each time.
Any other sources?
They mentioned the 155mm smoke shell M150. Its payload is titanium dioxide. When deployed, it aerosolizes. If used over sandy terrain, the TO could interact with airborne silica.
Affecting artillery crews.
Right. And also white phosphorus screening rounds. They use titanium igniters.
Yeah.
Activating them could loft sand, again creating potential T-SI interaction near combat engineers.
So the common thread is high-energy mixing titanium and silica, creating nanoparticles.
Precisely. Nanoparticles, less than 100 nanometers. Small enough to bypass typical filters and get deep into the lungs and potentially beyond.
And this isn't just theoretical military stuff, right? There's evidence from elsewhere.
There is. The manual cites golf, actually.
Golf, seriously.
Yeah. Studies show golfers have a higher ALS risk, odds ratio around 3.5. The theory: titanium face drivers hitting sandy, silica-dusted golf balls. Same principle. High energy, T-SI impact.
Wow. That's unexpected, but it fixed the pattern.
It does. Another example, woodworking. Using tin-coated saw blades on silica-rich wood, like pine, has been shown to release T-SI fragments into the air.
Another real-world mechanical interaction.
Exactly. And maybe the most compelling piece is an unpublished IDF Hebrew University pilot study.
What did they find?
They exposed rats to a T-SI aerosol for 6 weeks. The rats showed motor neuron loss and signs of oxidative stress in their spinal cords.
Direct biological evidence in an animal model linked to this specific exposure. That seems significant.
It's preliminary, being a pilot study, but yes, it's very relevant. It suggests a direct neurotoxic effect.
Okay, so the hypothesis is compelling, but what don't we know? What needs testing?
Good question. The manual outlines clear gaps and predictions, like actually measuring the aerosols during live fire size composition. They predict finding specific T-SI ratios in the nanoparticles.
Makes sense. What else?
Biomonitoring paratroopers measure titanium in hair, silicon in breath, before and after jumps. Predict increases post-jump. Also, cell culture studies expose motor neurons to T-SI particles versus Ti or Psi alone. Predict higher oxidative stress with the combination.
Lab bench validation.
And finally, a big epidemiological study using IDF health records. Look for dose-response relationship. Does higher estimated exposure link to higher ALS rates?
A comprehensive plan. Measure exposure, track biomarkers, test in cells, look at population data.
Exactly. Rigorous scientific validation.
And crucially, they don't just say, wait for the research. They propose immediate actions, right? Mitigation strategies.
Yes, absolutely. Based on the hierarchy of controls, engineering first. Maybe swap tie suppressors for steel or incornals in basic training. Keep tie for ops where weight is paramount.
Practical changes.
Administrative controls. Water spray landing zones before jumps to keep dust down. Use dust suppression mats on firing ranges.
Simple, but potentially effective.
PPE, better respirators. P3 rated filters for weapon maintenance crews. Jump masters people with repeated high exposure.
Protecting the individual.
And finally, medical surveillance. Add serum titanium and oxidative stress markers, like 8-OHDG, to annual checks for combat roles, catching potential issues earlier. It sounds like a pragmatic, multi-layered approach.
It does. Okay, that covers the titanium silica hypothesis pretty thoroughly. Let's switch gears to the second major theory. Formaldehyde from explosives and propellants.
Right. Formaldehyde, we know it's reactive stuff.
So what's the proposed link to ALS specifically in a military setting?
Well, the manual explains that formaldehyde, even at levels around 2 parts per million, can cause problems. It cross-links proteins and DNA, messing up their function.
Disrupting basic cell machinery.
Exactly. It also hits mitochondria, specifically complex I in the energy production chain, like jamming the cell's power generator.
Impairs energy production.
And it ramps up inflammation. It triggers microglia in the brain and spinal cord to release inflammatory signals like TNF-alpha.
And those things, protein aggregation, mitochondrial problems, inflammation, are all hallmarks of ALS pathology, aren't they?
They are. Consistently found in ALS patients. So the chemical effects of formaldehyde align worryingly well with the known disease mechanisms.
Okay, so how are soldiers getting exposed to these levels? You mentioned explosives.
Yes, modern high explosives, RDX, HMX, PTN, used in C4 and breaching charges.
Yeah.
Also, double-base propellants like in rockets or large guns.
And it's worse in confined spaces.
Absolutely critical point. When these detonate or burn in enclosed areas, tunnels, rooms, inside vehicles, the formaldehyde doesn't dissipate. It builds up. Peak levels can easily exceed 5 ppm, sometimes much higher, for brief periods, way above occupational safety limits.
So where does this happen most?
Several key scenarios. Breaching charges, C4, PTN sheets used in rooms or tunnels. Combat engineers' tunnel units are at high risk,
Entering immediately after a blast.
right into a potential plume of formaldehyde and other fumes.
Well-
Shoulder-fired rockets, like the Matador or Law. Especially in urban combat, the propellant backblast can rebound off walls, exposing the firing team. Infantry anti-tank teams. Also firing main guns in tanks or artillery pieces. The propellants release gases into the turret.
Trapped inside with the crew.
Yes. The manual cites U.S. Army data showing formaldehyde levels up to 15 ppm inside Bradley vehicles after firing.
15 ppm. That's concrete data showing high levels are possible in vehicles.
It really underscores the potential for significant exposure in armored vehicles,
Any other pathways?
even just preparing charges. C4 putty can off-gas formaldehyde slowly, so sappers, EOD techs, handling it frequently in enclosed prep areas could have chronic lower-level exposure too.
Accumulating over time. Okay. Is there evidence linking formaldehyde exposure to ALS outside the military?
Yes, the manual points to several lines of evidence. A Danish registry study linked chronic occupational exposure, think woodworkers, embalmers to about 1.8 times higher risk of ALS.
Occupational link.
A biomarker study found ALS patients had 1.7 times higher formaldehyde levels in their blood plasma than healthy controls.
Higher levels in patients.
Animal studies, too. Mice exposed to formaldehyde developed motor unit problems and accumulated phosphorylated TDP-43, another key ALS protein marker.
Mouse model showing neurological effects.
And an unpublished Israeli study found EOD technicians had double the levels of formic acid, a formaldehyde metabolite, in their urine compared to other combatants.
Suggesting higher formaldehyde uptake in those handling explosives. It's a convergence of evidence, epidemiological, biomarker, animal models.
Exactly. It builds a strong case for biological plausibility.
And they also mention synergy, right? Formaldehyde plus other military stressors.
Yes, like intense physical exertion or hypoxia low oxygen. Formaldehyde detoxification uses up glutathione, an antioxidant already stressed during heavy exertion.
So exertion depletes the defense system.
Potentially. And add hypoxia, maybe from blast smoke or confined spaces. It could worsen mitochondrial damage and neuronal stress, multiple hits amplifying the effect.
Makes sense. So again, what are the research gaps? What needs testing for this hypothesis?
Similar approach. They suggest real-time dosimetry clip-on formaldehyde badges for soldiers during breaching exercises to measure actual exposure.
Get our numbers.
Biomonitoring again.
Yeah.
Measure formic acid or other formaldehyde adducts like S-nitrosilide hemoglobin in tunnel teams pre- and post-mission.
Track uptake.
Cell culture experiments combining formaldehyde and hypoxia, see how motor neurons react.
Test the synergy idea in the lab.
And another targeted epidemiological study, compare ALS rates in IDF units with high versus low breaching activity levels.
Again, focused research to nail down the link in the military context.
That's the goal.
And like before, immediate mitigation steps are proposed.
Yes, practical measures. Engineering. Use low formaldehyde explosives for training when possible. Install active exhaust fans on tank turrets.
Clear the air faster.
Administrative. Implement a breathe step back drill after indoor detonations. Wait 10 seconds before re-entry. Limit time spent prepping charges indoors. Do it outside if possible.
Simple procedures, big potential impact.
PPE. Provide half-mask respirators with proper formaldehyde cartridges for breachers. Use barrier creams when handling C4 to reduce skin absorption.
Specific protection.
And surveillance. Annual lung function tests and neurochecks for EOD and combat engineers. But digital formaldehyde loggers in vehicles to track levels continuously.
Again, drawing on best practices from industries where formaldehyde is a known hazard seems very thorough. It really does. So it's clear the manual goes beyond just identifying risks. It offers a very practical playbook for mitigation.
Absolutely. And I like how they structure it using the hierarchy of controls: eliminate, substitute, engineer, administrate, PPE. It's a standard, robust safety framework.
Right. They give military examples for each level, like swapping suppressors, elimination substitution, vehicle ventilation engineering, wet drills for dust, administrative, respirators, PPE.
It's a multi-layered defense strategy, tackling the problem from different angles.
And they get really specific with this immediate action playbook, listing tasks, units, equipment, time, even estimated cost per soldier.
Yeah, things like fit testing respirators, swapping suppressors, installing exhaust fans, water misting LZs, clip-on dosimeters, very concrete.
Makes it actionable for units on the ground.
Exactly. They even provide draft SOP inserts, standard operating procedure changes for ranges, breach drills, vehicle ops, parachute landings.
And many are low-cost behavioral changes.
Hmm. Like positioning soldiers on paved areas for firing to reduce dust or having paratroopers turn away from the dust cloud on landing. Smart, simple adjustments.
What about medical surveillance in this section?
Very detailed protocols. Annual neuro exams, specific blood panels checking formaldehyde markers, titanium, oxidative stress, plus lung function tests, exposure log reviews, with clear thresholds for action, proactive monitoring to catch things early.
And they know this needs buy-in, right? Culture change.
Definitely. They propose command briefs, educational posters, mural without poison, with QR codes for feedback, systems for soldiers to report concerns easily.
Raising awareness, fostering a safety culture.
Crucial for making these changes stick.
They even did a cost-benefit analysis based on a pilot in the Javadi Brigade.
Yes, suggesting that the upfront costs might be offset by preventing even a few ALS cases, given the high long-term costs of the disease.
Makes economic sense, too, besides the human imperative.
Right. And they set clear metrics for success.
Yeah.
Baseline 2024 levels, target 2026 levels for things like respirator use, formaldehyde in tanks, nanotie ranges, and ultimately ALS incidence rates.
Measurable goals to track progress. Very systematic.
Very.
Okay, that brings us to the final big piece, the research and surveillance roadmap. This looks forward, what, 5 years?
Yes, a 5-year plan with a dual mission: generate solid exposure disease evidence, but also feed real-time safety data back to commanders now.
Balancing long-term proof with immediate risk management. Smart.
Very. The strategic objectives are clear. Quantify exposures accurately across all roles, track neurological health prospectively.
So follow people over time.
Exactly. From early biomarkers to actual diagnoses. Then, validate the interventions they proposed earlier, and critically, share the data openly.
Open science. Establishing a data commons for researchers inside and outside Israel.
Yes, ethically managed, anonymized data sharing to speed up discovery globally. That's a huge commitment.
How is the research structured?
5 main work packages: exposure mapping using sensors, biomonitoring and registry with volunteer cohorts, toxicology models using animals, intervention trials to test mitigations in the field, and data commons and ethics for infrastructure and oversight. A comprehensive structure. What kind of methods are they planning to use? Cutting-edge stuff. Real-time sensors like portable particle sizers, electrochemical formaldehyde sensors, omics biomarkers, plasma formaldehyde, hair tie, serum neurofilament L, transcriptomics, advanced neuroimaging like DGI and MRS, and sophisticated Bayesian stats to model it all.
Pulling out all the stops technologically and methodologically.
It seems so. They want high-quality, defensible data.
And there are clear milestones along the way.
Yes, over the 60 months. Things like releasing the open-source protocol, publishing exposure heat maps, getting animal study results out, reporting intervention trial outcomes, launching the open database, tangible deliverables.
How about funding and collaboration?
They're looking broadly. Domestically MOD, Innovation Authority, internationally US DoD, EU entities, NATO, even industry partners who make the gear, or PPE, casting a wide net for resources and expertise, essential for a project this ambitious.
And they've thought about risks, operational tempo, data security, red tape.
Briefly mentioned, yes. With contingency planning, they reiterate success metrics for 2029. Number of soldiers with exposure histories, number of publications, exposure data for all new ALS cases, and ultimately reductions in exposures and ALS incidents.
A bottom line.
Right. And they end that chapter with an open call for collaboration from the global scientific community, even providing an email address.
Very open, very proactive.
It really is.
So, wrapping this up, this deep dive into Mur'al without poison, it's clear this manual is a major step, a proactive, urgent response to a deeply concerning health issue for Israel soldiers.
Absolutely. That core idea, Mur'al without poison, maintaining fighting spirit while protecting from hidden dangers, really captures the essence of it.
And that dual approach really stands out, doesn't it? Immediate field actions based on current knowledge, plus a rigorous long-term research plan to find definitive answers.
It's the right way to tackle something this complex and serious. You act now, but you commit to learning more and refining your approach.
And the potential impact goes way beyond Israel, as you said. Similar exposures likely affect militaries and even first responders worldwide.
The findings, the methods, the solutions developed here could be invaluable globally, a template for protecting service members everywhere.
The authors dedicate the work to every soldier, hoping it leads to real improvements in health and safety. You can feel the commitment.
It comes through strongly.
And it leaves us, and you listening, with a Pretty profound thought, I think. Consider the unseen environmental costs of modern military service. What other hidden exposures might be out there? What else do we need to investigate proactively to truly protect those who serve?
It's a sobering question, but a vital one. We need data-driven approaches like the one outlined here to understand and mitigate these risks. It's a crucial consideration for the future.